Thank you. Explore Your Elements is the greatest screen name for a Zoom meeting. Welcome.
Thank you. It's the name of my company. I'll change it to my name.
No, it's great. Where are you calling from?
Currently from Czechia.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's like we've got a global world here. Welcome.
Thank you.
All right, we'll give it one more moment. It's so funny. Belle is watching her sister's kids, and she's got the whole like, I've got to drop off kids, I've got to get to a birthday party, I've got to do blah 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 thing. And I'm like, we know that drill very well.
I mean, seriously.
All right, guys. So I think we will. I don't want people to miss the interest of the first clip though, so we give this like one more minute because it's actually really, really fun. But we have been thinking a lot about this this conversation, and I'm excited to dive in, and I want to use every single minute of it. So we will again say welcome to all of you for being here, and thanks for being on time. Always makes it easier. And then we had 100 people, 120 people who said they wanted to come, and we'll see how many people end up making it happen on a Saturday. But if there's ever been a theme where you trust that whoever's supposed to be here is here, this would be the one. So. All right, Mita, in 30 seconds, let's start the video.
Yay, Mary Scott, so glad you're here.
See, these are my kind of people. We slide in like 30 seconds.
But I just recently heard like there's now and not now. And like now it is.
Kelly gets nervous because I'm like, oh, I've got a Zoom call in 2 minutes. I'm like, I'm going to start getting like upstairs and ready. As opposed to the people who are, all aligned and ready to roll. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you guys. Look at this. I love this picture. So I'm Nancy Giordano, for those I haven't met, and I'll be co-hosting this with my very long and dear close friend, Alexis Sanford, who also happens to live in Austin. And we reconnected at an airport a couple of years ago and have like rekindled our amazing connection and all the things we want to go do together. So it's been really, really fun. And we haven't collaborated together in quite some time, Lex. So it's been really fun building and shaping this conversation with you all. So I say we jump into the video, and then we'll talk about why we did this month. What do you say? Sorry for our tech glitches. Just so you guys know, in the behind the scenes, so Zamita has been part of our team for 2 to 3 years, but she is leaving. This is like her last week. This is her last official event, and then she will be with us for just another week. So Emma is training with her about how to do some of these tech things, so we can do this again next time a little bit more fluidly. So we have a learning practicum happening in real time.
Sorry, everyone. We're having some technical difficulties. I'll pick it up as soon as possible.
High time when you're ready. Again, just for the people who have never been part of this whole thing, we do this on January 1st every year. This year we decided it's kind of a tumultuous year. We're going to be on the 1st of every month as a way of just sort of giving us a new perspective on how to handle all the craziness that's happening around us. I don't know if anyone can recognize what that feeling is when you start to like look down the hole, and then suddenly the journey that you're in. But as we were trying to figure out a best way to kind of pull us into this conversation, Emma found that clip, and it's to me the perfect way of inviting you into this conversation about the inner journey that we take in order to more effectively impact the outer change that we all, I think, are aligned and want to do. As we pick the themes for each of these months, we do tie it to the calendar. And so happy June 1st, the month of the summer solstice. We've been thinking a lot about this dance between light and dark and the symbiosis between the two, and how we often explore one more than the other, but it's really about the unity of the two that get us there. And so I did a little ChatGPT conversation-y about the history of the summer solstice and how it was honored in civilizations past, right? The ancient Druids, it was Stonehenge when the light hit that perfect moment, or when you talked about ancient Egypt. And it was also about the timing of the Nile rising, which was around fertility, and so crucial for agriculture. And the goddess Isis became part of this. And then we end up with First Nations who do sun dances and really welcome the power of the sun. And again, our relationship with the two. But it's really about the shadow side, which I think is so fascinating, right? So it's not just about hope and renewal and light and energy and fertility, but it's also about how do we unite that with the other side of it, right? The new story is that we're spending more time now also honoring and appreciating and respecting the dark. And I think a lot again about the yin and the yang and the relationship between those two things. And I started thinking about the origin of this term shadow work, and where we really started looking at that. For me, it was really when you go back to Esalen and the days of the human potential movement in the 1960s. And as I was Googling more about what was happening at Esalen, and you've got all these famous names, right? You got Abraham Maslow, and you got Timothy Leary, and Aldous Huxley, and Fritz Perls, and even Buckminster Fuller, and these amazing names. What's really interesting is it's almost impossible to find a woman that was also credited with, super changing work during that time. There were some women that were part of Esalen, but when you Google it, you can't find it. It's very, very difficult. When you're there, all the adoration on the wall is very, very masculine, interestingly. And so for something that was so advanced in its thinking and so conscious raising, it was interesting how that thing, for me, there's still a big gap and bias in some of that work. So then you touch to, how did it become a more modern day interpretation? For me, again, one of the early introductions is when I went to Zappos and met Tony Hsieh, and that was back in the early days when he was trying to really think how we redo management and organizations and holacracy, and how we bring the whole self to our work, and coaches that were part of the environment at Zappos, because they deal, again, as if you're in the happiness business, right? And you're in the customer service business, you can only take care of other people well if you feel as though you're also well taken care of. And so we tried to create a culture and an environment where people felt as though they were also receiving that which is they were giving. He really understood, again, the relationship between the inside and the outside. And then we finally turned to a woman, Carol Dweck, and her work around growth mindset, and how important it is that we move out of this idea of having a fixed way of looking at the world or a fixed way of understanding ourselves, and move into a space in which we think about this in much more dynamic ways. You can also talk about the Enneagram. I mean, there are a lot of really interesting tools that I think looked at this from a more fluid place. In the corporate world, there's a book that came out in early 2014, 2016, Deliberately Developmental Organizations, that really use the word shadow work. And it was written by Robert Keegan and a bunch of smart people from Harvard, and they did a bunch of work around that. And then I went to Google Trends, and I was like, okay, when did the work shadow work really take off? And it was interesting during COVID. Like, it's been around for a bit at a really low level. It took off a little bit then in March 2020, interestingly, had a hit spike in September 2020, then kind of fell down a little bit, and then it had a huge spike in September 2023. I have no idea what happened then, but at some point, I think that it sort of caught our consciousness again about this way of thinking and how important it is that we invest more time and energy in that. And the question is why, right? I've been preaching at it from the stage around the world around embracing diversity, right? We can't do the work that we need to go do if we don't have more diverse people at the table, but it's not just about having more diverse faces. It's also about being able to have space for dissenting conversations. And you can't feel confident being in a situation where you're raising your voice if you're in the minority, or being able to accept someone else's point of view if you haven't done some of your own work and don't feel challenged or threatened by that, particularly at a moment in time under so much flux, right? Where people don't feel like they know what they're doing. They don't feel as confident as they were before. We're being asked to be constant learners, right? And have beginner's mind, which are all things that move us out of an ego place where we think that we know. I often talk about that learning and leading simultaneously is a very, very difficult challenge to do. It's not the way that we've been patterned to do this historically, right? So how do we develop the capacity to be in a space of both being in flux and in charge, if you will? And so that was a big part of, I think, what led to that. I think now it's even more imperative, right? I put this whole list together about why now. Certainly COVID and the Great Resignation or the Great Wake Up, in which we started to think about what we're really doing with our lives and whether or not we're in environments that hold us well, and who is it that we really want to be, and is this, are the inner and the outer aligned? Certainly taken on greater conversations. I think the Black Lives Movement and the Me Too movement is so important in raising consciousness about the fact that not everyone's lived experience is the same as ours, and being more sensitive to that. And as our empathy continues to increase, it's phenomenal, right? I was reading a book a friend of mine had written about history. I mean, we used to do horrible, horrible things to each other. I mean, the good news, as bad as it looks now, we've actually become much more sensitive about each other's needs, but at some points, then it almost tips to the other side, which is that we have like empathy overload, empathy burnout. Like I struggle with where it is to put so much care and attention of all the things that are happening in the world at the same time. And with that then becomes a recognition of a profound sense of loss. Several of us on this call were at an event in Tangier recently called House of Beautiful Business. And Tim, one of the hosts that really started with this whole soliloquy around all the things that we're losing around security and identity and sometimes hope and certainty and this whole list of things that we're grappling with. As the things open up for the new, I'm learning that there's actually something about hospicing the old, right? And having people transition through that in a more meaningful way and not just feel like we just jump into all the light and all the good without having some process around grieving what it is that we are losing. Sometimes for the good, sometimes it's just really, really hard to watch the pain and suffering around the world. So how do we navigate that more thoughtfully? And the last two things are really the sense of imposter syndrome. I was once when it was still called Twitter, and I still liked the social media platform. There was a conversation about what are the biggest existential threats to humanity, and people would talk about climate, and people would talk about war, and people would talk about political divide. But then somebody wrote imposter syndrome, and at first I thought that was sort of ludicrous and small thinking. And then I started thinking about it. I realized how profound that is. If we all are afraid that we are not enough, and we are all afraid that we're walking into spaces in which we are unprepared, we cannot do the big work that is being asked of us to do right now, right? We cannot take on the big challenges. We can, again, not listen to other people. Like, it is actually at the root of so much of the suffering that we are witnessing right now. So we can actually find mechanisms and pathways out of that. That certainly sets us up better. And the very last, I will say, we're also patterning AI. And if we're patterning AI after, some of the human, I wouldn't say frailties, but some of the less wholehearted, the less full-rounded of our experience, we're certainly not building a tool that is going to help us thrive as we move forward. Really, it sets up a whole bunch of really amplified problems as opposed to amplified strengths. So I really feel like it's super, super important to dive into this work. So with that as context, thank you for letting me take you through my little mini talk on why we're doing this, why it's so important. And I'll turn it over to Lex in a second. But first, and then as ChatGPT and I were having this whole conversation this morning, I asked it to write me a haiku. And we went through a couple rounds of haikus, but here's the one that we landed on together to kind of set us up for this, which is taking all of that and summarizing it. I will say, inner light unfolds, shadows transform, world renews, sunshine sparks the shift. And with that, I welcome you, Lex, as our co-host for this month's gathering on the inner journey to create outer change. You want to tell us a little bit more about who you are and what you do? Again, Lex and I have been strategists and facilitators together for a very, very, very long time, sisters in many different ways. And I'm so grateful that you are here. And thank you for making time after your daughter's graduation and all the other things that you were doing just a few days ago to be prepared and hop on with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. It's amazing to get to just sort of share some space. I think you gave a beautiful intro. And I guess the only thing I'll really say is I am a sister on the journey. I do coaching, I do facilitation, and I'm particularly interested in what are we longing for that the world needs now? And so what are these new stories that will kind of take us to our power? And as Nancy and the team were really talking about this light to dark, one of the places we started was just showing up in your body. So we're going to do this quickly because there are some fantastic more pieces of content to share. But as we get ready to listen, absorb, and receive, there's a whole piece of just landing in ourselves. So I'm going to stand up and I invite each of you to do the same. This is just a really simple centering practice that I learned from Stacey Haynes at the Strauss Institute. She's an embodied somatic leader. And it's just a practice to bring us right here. It's a centering breath practice. She says you have to do it 300 times to lay down a neural pathway, 3,000 times to do it when you get reactive. So I'm doing it whenever I can with any group I can, because I believe I need to get towards 3,000. I'm maybe in the 150 so far. But it's just an invitation to do that going in. So the first, it's like a series of breaths. So the first one is just breathing through your own length. Feeling yourself tall from your tip of your head to your feet. This is a centering in your own dignity. The next set of breaths is just centering in your width. Can you breathe from one side of your body to the next? It's a centering in your connection. And although we're virtual, we are connected to one another side by side. The next set of breaths is in your depth. So this is really kind of from the back of your body, the front of your body. And as you feel this, it's a centering in time, not the sort of chronos time, but kairos time, that there is enough time. And we can bend time to make it what we need to connect. The final set of breaths is sort of breathing into your heart. And Stacey likes to say this is breathing into your purpose. You may have a life purpose that you are in touch with, you've done some work with. It may be just the purpose of this call, why you wanted to show up, your intention. And as you take your final breath, just move your body as you feel needed. Find yourself here with this group, shake, whatever it is you need to do. I do a lot of work with Melanie, who's also on this call, and she works with the neuroscientist, Bruce Perry, who talks a lot about just the very simple brain reality that we first need to regulate ourselves. Then we need to relate. So I invite you to look, if you can, I don't know if you have Nancy, or if you have us all on the screen, make eye contact with somebody here, just to kind of smile. You can see a person at a time. You're there. Just to relate that we all are here. And that opens up our prefrontal cortex to really reason and catch all of this amazing content from all of the amazing places that we're going to bring in this discussion, and all of the hard work that Nancy and her team did to bring some really powerful kernels of discussion into the space. So I turn it back to you, Nancy.
Sorry, I'm doing this in a restaurant in Costa Rica. So
You did good. You stood up. That was good.
I know, you know what? There's a moment where I hesitated. I'm like, no, man, this is about inner journey. Like, I can do this in front of other people. So here we are. So I think I'm really proud of myself. Thanks for noticing that, Alex.
Yeah, that was good.
But yes, anyway, it's like, Christine, I didn't realize you were here. It is actually really interesting. Like, you see the montage, but unless you actually really connect with the faces, you don't know who's really, really here. So thank you for that, Lex. I really, really appreciate that. And so now we will turn over to Lisa Hildebrand. So again, Christine and Lisa and I, and maybe some others, and Bel, We're at this amazing event called House of Beautiful Business in Tangier a month ago. And as my brother Martin and I were discussing IDGs and my curiosity to learn more about inner development goals, he's like, you must talk to Lisa, you must talk to Lisa. So as the world works, of course, Lisa and I found each other on Zoom after that live event and had a chance to catch up more. So I would love for her to give us a bit of an introduction to this concept of IDGs. Many of us have heard about SDGs, right? Strategic Development Goals. In which 192 countries are aligned on the 17 things that as humanity we should be moving toward in order to have a safe and flourishing life for us all. But there's now a companion piece to that work as I understand it. And so Lisa, you're going to take us through a bit of a PowerPoint, I think, and then talk to us about this.
Yeah. So Nancy, I think we have a video first.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I totally forgot about that. Well, yeah. Okay. So Lisa, in fairness, so you don't have to do all the heavy lifting. There is a summit called the IDG Summit. It's happened, I think, at least once before. It will happen again in October. And here's a little trailer to that. And Lisa's involved in that work as well. So.
The Inner Development Goals are a framework of 23 skills in 5 dimensions that we believe can help us accelerate towards a more sustainable future.
Well, the science is clear. We have a planetary emergency, and emergencies mean that we're running out of time and we're facing catastrophic risks. So now is the time to collectively, universally, all human beings on Earth, to really reconnect with the planet and transform towards a safe and prosperous future.
We know what the problem is, we know what the solutions are. We are not implementing it. So the problem we face is a massive knowing-doing gap.
We are going through one of the biggest planetary scale civilizational shifts that any of us have ever lived through. At this time, we need to do the impossible.
The darkness is an invitation for you to be great. 1 in 400 years great.
I'm obsessed with collaboration because there is no way on earth the scale of the problems that face us today will ever be resolved if we do not lay down our egos.
You start by giving with no strings attached. When you do that, there is an external ripple effect, but there's also an inner ripple effect. Something changes in you.
I'm a genocide survivor. I survived genocide in 1994. I embarked on a journey of reconciliation and embarked on a journey of forgiveness.
People awakening to what it means to be a human being at our best. Because very often we find ourselves in circumstances where we're kind of human beings at our worst.
Inner does not mean individual. This is not an individual pursuit. It is a collective thing. We grow in relationship to others. We are our relationships to others.
I think the IDG initiative is important because with that personal transformation, right, that inner development comes external transformation. That real transformational change happens through just enough individuals making up their minds to make a difference. That's contagious.
And the thing about this inner development goal, oh my gosh, we all knew it. We know that's the power of every single one of you that makes that change. You don't have to stand on this stage. You don't need to be Richard Branson. It's use your voice and use your energy.
The human beings can develop. You aren't what you are today. There is a potential we can change. And that means that the system that we are building can change.
And can you thank yourself for being willing to look at a thing that's kind of scary, which is how might I need to give up something that I've cherished in order to become the next version of myself?
I think what we want the IDG Summit to be about is something beyond the IDG Summit, because this, in the end, is just an event. And as beautiful as that is, what is really important is what will come out of this. The connections that are being created here, the ideas, the collaborations, and everything that will follow after the IDG Summit.
We can do this. We can do this. And how about this? We will do this.
How many of you know you need to change?
And there you go, Lisa. Tell us more.
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here because it's a topic I could spend hours talking about, not like the inner development goals itself, but more like human development. And like it makes me really angry that we're not better at being human yet. So yeah, I'm love to share some of my thoughts. I gonna go into what the IDGs are, but also I'm gonna spend a lot of time on like what I see, the potential I see in them, because I'm not like an official part of the IDG corporation, but I think it can be a really powerful tool. So, and I hope to have give some inspiration and maybe have a nice conversation afterwards. Can you see my screen? Wonderful. Inspired also by the House of Beautiful Business, where Nancy and I also met. I really like the perspective on like polycrisis versus poly opportunity, because it really puts light on that it's really about the stories we tell ourselves, and it's a lot about how we make sense of the world, and that in the end the reality is always constructed. So we are right now in this liminal space where we kind of came to an end with the existing systems. It's a little bit like the caterpillar that came into this little cocoons, like you can see in the background, and now it's time for our like butterflies come out. So today I want to look a little bit on like what that means in terms of like inner growth for outer change. And yeah, Nancy, you did a beautiful job in framing the whole setting. So I would skip over like most like the start, but just I really like this image, because I always have us human beings, and I imagine us like working on Windows Explorer and like trying to install all these like great new Apple software. And probably if we would do that, it would be like super loud and super hot and it wouldn't work at all. And I often think that's kind of what we see right now on the wall. So we came to an end in terms of what our current systems are capable of. We have like a lot of like climate problems, like ecological climate, but also like political climate, mental health. Like there's so much friction that you can really see. It's like this overheated computer. And that's why we actually need so much outer change, right? And I thought about that a lot, like why, like what the reasons are there as well. And for me, it comes a lot about how our human striving for simplifying, to being certain about something, to predict something. It's our sometimes, especially when we're stressed, and it's like a survival mode that we try to be certain and put things in boxes and have like clear stories. And it is really like great actually, because it's like this map we have. It helps us to navigate through our world, but sometimes the maps need to be updated. And the maps are never the territory, right? So how can we update our maps? And because in the end, we live in a territory, we live in a complex living systems. So it's not the near time where we have actually change our maps, or in other words, we have to like update our cultural operating systems. So this is a lot what the IDGs also talk about. So what do they mean with cultural operating system? It's the relationship to ourselves, it's the relationship to others, it's the relationship to nature. So in the end, that's why we need inner growth for outer change, because we need to work on these kind of relationship. And they also in the video said it's not about individual, but it's more about the collective capacity, and it starts with ourselves. But it's it's like so much. There's so much related to that, and as you mentioned in the beginning, Nancy, there's like so many topics that actually go into human development. It's not a new thing, but there's a reason that there's like more consciousness for it now. And you asked why, and I think it is really because we're feeling it in our bodies, in our whole system, that there is like we need to grow out of this. We need to become like from the caterpillar to the butterfly. Looking towards the inner development goals, it's a non-profit organization. They all like the framework and everything is open source. There's a lot of research, a lot of great, you mentioned Robert Keegan earlier, Nancy, for instance, his work went into that. There's a lot of great scientists, but also other professionals. Also, you saw the speakers from last summit. There's a lot of really like people from all over the world that think a lot about human or study a lot of human development, and they basically narrate put it into a framework. So that's one part, the IDGs, the Inner Development Goals in 5 dimensions, 23 goals. There's one part of what the organization does. I won't do like a full deep dive here in terms of what the every goal stands for, because I think the website does a much better job than I will do here. But just that you see it, and I will, like in a second, I will also talk about why I think that can be helpful. Because actually you might have noticed it's kind of a following after another. So you start with being, then you go into thinking, you start relating to others, then you can collaborate, and then you can actually act. And I think most of you would agree that often in our reality, we directly jump into acting. So I think especially like already with that, it might be valuable to look at the IDGs. But besides the framework, there's also actually a really strong and growing community, and a lot of, like, besides the scientists and all that I mentioned, there's a lot of great individuals all over the world. There's 500 plus hubs and networks now. There's more than 80 countries involved, 33,000 people that somehow try to make sense of the IDGs in their context, and they gather. There was the summit, but there's also like local meetings, there's online meetings every month. So there's like a great community. And I think if you, in this kind of spaces, you had the rabbit hole video in the beginning when we feel lost, it's just great to have this crowd and to make sense together, which brings me to the next point, and that's what I meant in the beginning. That's my personal opinion on how the IDGs can help everyone, or like how we can be inspired by them in these liminal spaces or a liminal space we are in right now, because they are on human growth and collective learning. So one part is the framework itself, because I think it does do a great job simplifying a very complex field of human development or human growth, which can be quite overwhelming. So it really helps to give us some focus areas, to have like little pieces we can concentrate on one after another. It helps to inspire like how our learning process might look like. It helps us to, maybe cut it down when we talk about inner growth, what it actually means. And also it might be a point of reference in the future, but for corporations to be like, okay, but how do we make sure people trust each other, for instance? That being said, I think there's a lot of great frameworks in the world, and there's probably also great like other ones. So for me, one like really valuable part is that there is a growing community and a movement behind this IDGs. And what I experienced myself is that it brings together great people, and it creates serendipity. And I think that's why it's just valuable. It has been valuable for me to interact with it, because it gives like this kind of space to connect and explore. Like I said before, make sense of the world together, to also unlearn together. So like referring back to the caterpillar, like some things have to die for others to be like given birth to. And for global collaboration. That having said, I really believe, and that's why I love the darkness and light metaphor as well, that since we cling so much to certainty and structure, we can use that as inspiration, but then in the end, we really need the ability to accept that we live in a complex world, to let go of what we know, to like really embrace both light and darkness and find like this dance in between, and to let new things emerge. So that's quite abstract. So I would love to show or talk a little bit about what actually I'm involved in now for the summit, because I'm gonna be hosting one of the dimension spaces, and that's the one for the collaboration. So I can give you a little context, so maybe that inspires you on how you could also use the IDGs just as a reference point. Yeah, so we gonna host, like, me and some like great other gardeners, this collaboration garden, which will be a fourth space, so a space where strangers are able to meet and unlearn together, to be in a playful way together, and to co-create something together. And what we want to co-create is what they call social soil, so the kind of field, this how we interact, how we are together, to create the space where new things can grow. And so basically learn what it feels like when we actually manage to fulfill the IDGs. How does it feel like? Because what I often noticed, what a lot of people struggle is to, okay, there's these IDGs, I cognitively understand what they're about, but then how do I get there? And I think, again, there's this caterpillar example, like the caterpillar knows that it needs to grow into something else, and this starts building this cocoon, but it doesn't know what it actually will be, because also, I mean, it's kind of suicide. So in the end, probably it's good that the caterpillar doesn't know, but that's like this embodied learning, like just going with it. And yeah, that's one part of the garden. There's also going to be a part where the community can come together and say, like, okay, what is really valuable from your perspective, which kind of tools and methodologies, and how can we like use that together, like kind of a fertilizer. And then it's also going to be about cross-pollinating. So how can we use what we already have and like connect better, and yeah, create more than 1 + 1 = 2. So yeah, so that's the whole, like, in a really nutshell, like what we're trying to do. I hope you kind of understood what it's about. I'm also happy to talk about it more. But yeah, we don't have so much time. So I want to end with this question. I'm not sure if we have much time to talk about it, but I think that's actually, when it comes from like inner growth to outer change, a great question to start with, because in the end, it's like, what do we need to flourish as like individuals, but also as collective? Because I think that's the soil that we need to actually change something in the world.
Beautiful, beautiful job. Thank you so much. That's a lot of work to try and condense very, very quickly and very clearly, and in English. So thank you for doing all of that so beautifully, Lisa. I love that it makes the inner work discussable. Like, that is such a, such a profound way of thinking about, like, how can we have a shared conversation around these things, and how can we dig in more deeply. And so I think you're right about simplifying what is often very complex or very dispersed conversations. And so that's why I also am very excited about what the IDGs provide. And I love the work that you all are doing to make this more accessible and more embodied, and all the things that you're doing around there. And so if anybody wants to jump in, and either in the chat or in, I love that you guys are participating in the chat, by the way. Thank you so much for doing that too. And thank you, Emma, for navigating, and Kelly for jumping in. But what do we need to flourish? For me, it's such a big question that I don't know that we can answer it in one word. But if I had to put one word around it, I think we all need to feel safe. Would be my word. What do you guys think? Okay, never mind.
I'm just going to say, I think part of what we need is bravery, right? And courage of the heart to go inside is a scary moment, right? Mythically, all those things. And so there's a individual and collective courage, and courage is contagious, right? When I see someone being courageous, I'm inspired to do the same.
Right. Marianne Williamson always says, when you let your light shine, you unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. So I think it is in that space. And so that is the perfect segue, actually, into the next piece. So while Lisa and I were in the audience at the House of Beautiful Business, along with Christine, we got to listen to a beautiful, beautiful speaker who I'm very excited to introduce you all to. She also then became a friend and someone I'm very excited to stay in conversation with and continue to support in the work that she's doing. But she showed what it means to bring some of this to action. Like how does it really impact your work when you start to let those alignment with who you are on the inside impact and better again, align or fit with the work that you do on the outside. So we'll play a little excerpt of a talk that she gave at TEDx Berlin. And I'll introduce you to Bel Trew, who is a award-winning journalist for The Independent. She is their chief, I think, international correspondent. She's won Foreign Correspondent of the Year awards. She's extraordinary for her young age and her talk about bravery and the work that she does and where she goes and does it. I think in this clip, it'll give context about the spaces that she has done this work, but she's here with us live, so then we get to have a little chat with Bel afterwards. So Bel, I'm so grateful for you and your work, and let us introduce you via your video.
The total collapse of discourse. Now, the first group to be blamed for any breakdown in societal communication is usually the mainstream media. I'm not entirely sure what everyone means by the mainstream media. I know that I'm frequently accused of being it, like it's a cartoon villain, which I guess is kind of flattering, right? Little old me, Bel Trew, responsible for every major media outlet on the planet. But although I'd like to defend my compromised profession, there might be a tiny nugget of truth in it. And that truth might just be key to fixing this. I'd like to tell you a story. For the last 2 years, I've been covering Europe's bloodiest war in generations, Ukraine. In April 2022, when the Russians withdrew from around the capital, Kyiv, my teams and I went up there. After a pretty horrendous day of reporting, we stumbled upon the body of a young Ukrainian man. He'd been bound, he'd been shot in the back, and his body had been dumped by this abandoned Russian camp. We spent a year trying to find out who he was, what happened to him, what happened to his family, and in the process, we uncovered a devastating part that plagues every conflict: the desperate search for the missing and for the dead. During the course of filming this investigation, which became my first feature-length documentary, The Body in the Woods, we met a teenage boy, a Ukrainian teenage boy called Vladislav. Vladislav's mother, his only parent, had been shot dead by Russian soldiers as she tried to deliver humanitarian aid outside of Kyiv. Vladislav was desperately looking for her body, and in fact, he'd actually been given the wrong corpse to cremate at one point. Orphaned and alone, he moved in with his lawyer, who was helping him in the quest. All he had left were a few belongings and a pet hedgehog. The reason I'm telling you this today is because when we did the initial first screening, the first feedback we got was that while this was definitely a documentary about war, there wasn't a single image of a frontline trench in it. In fact, the only videos of tanks and soldiers appeared at the beginning when we were setting the scene. We had that footage from our own reporting, from our own archives. We had the footage of incoming projectiles, of frontline artillery positions, but for whatever reason, it had ended up on the cutting room floor. Subconsciously, we'd realized that the most impactful way to show the devastation of war was in the image of a teenage boy, his hedgehog, and his heartbreak. And I was really struggling with this and what makes good journalism after a particularly tricky trip to Ukraine last year, where I just met so many families whose lives had been upended, that I decided to print off a sticker and put it on my laptop, where it remains today. And that sticker reads, "Truth and compassion." For so long, I'd lived by the maxim, "The truth will set you free." But as I went from horror to horror, from war to war, I realized that sometimes the truth was a bit blurry. And if we only peddle our own truth, we're in danger of not seeing all sides of the story, as difficult as it is sometimes to reach across that divide. And that's where we cycle back to the collapse of discourse. It has polarized all of us so much that we cannot imagine that there is another side to the story, let alone that there might be a humanity to it. It's a world where we have a broken discourse. But it's a world, maybe, where conflict journalism can step up. I spoke to family members of those who are being held hostage in Gaza right now by militants. I spoke to family members of those who were killed on the 7th of October. And some of them said to me that they didn't believe that a destruction and a collective punishment of Gaza would do any good. They said, not in my name, and some of them have joined protests calling for a ceasefire that are taking place in Tel Aviv right now, despite the fact they're facing global criticism from people on their own side. There was one interview that struck me. It was with a man called Jonathan, an Israeli man, and his mother had been killed on the 7th of October. And this interview impacted me so much, I actually had to put my phone on mute because I needed to take a minute to breathe. Jonathan told me, and I directly quote him, "Vengeance is not a strategy. Violence will not fix violence. Invest in peace." To experience such a searing level of pain, like to have your mother murdered, but yet to see the suffering of others, is the deepest well of compassion that I feel that we can all learn from. It's a well of compassion that's perhaps needed right now as the death toll is soaring in Gaza. As some of the world's most respected rights groups like Save the Children are saying Palestinian civilians and children are being killed at a historic rate. And it is a deep well of compassion that I feel journalists could learn from to build a better journalism. A journalism that turns from the patriarchal tendencies to fetishize violence, that tells the true impact of war in and out of the trenches. A journalism that could go some way to helping us heal society. A journalism that might even be able to help fix this broken discourse. And it's why I will continue to shout from the rooftops. Only truth and compassion together can set us free.
Wow.
We don't get the benefit of hearing the loud, thunderous applause that gives you a moment to kind of transition from that talk to this conversation. But Bel, again, we are so grateful that you are on the planet and that you are in this conversation. And I don't see you on my screen somewhere, but I think you're there. There you are. Let's unmute Bel. I don't know if you can unmute yourself.
Yes.
But, you know, again, I am a bit of an introvert when I go to these events. Like, I don't rush up to every one of the speakers and tell them how and gush at how extraordinary they were. But I had wanted to speak to Bel, and it just the timing and the space wasn't right. But all of a sudden, we were at this closing dinner, and we were both at the same buffet line. And finally, I got gutsy, and I was like, "Hey, I was really impacted by your talk today, obviously, but I'm also really curious. When you let the door of compassion open, how do you still go do your work?" Like, I'm gonna start to cry when I ask this question of you, Bel, because I think that I struggle with this in my own world, right? You want to feel it all, but you want to be able to have a level of objectivity and a level of compartmentalization, and you want to somehow figure out how not to let those two things, like, in some ways rumble too closely together. And somehow you have put a bumper sticker or a sticker on your computer that reminds you to do that every day. How do you do it?
I mean, the shortest answer to that is it's really hard, because I think why we have had a structure within journalism, and that's, obviously a small part of journalism. I think we've had a structure which has been quite separated. Either you have someone on camera who's almost talking about what's happening behind them, like they're in a kind of nature documentary, and that's been the structure from before. Or you've had a kind of slightly macho elements to conflict reporting, which I mentioned in the longer version of my talk, where everyone's a bit sort of gutsy and they're on the front line, and that's sort of a lot of gallows humor, and that comes out actually from the soldiers as well. Those are coping mechanisms so that you don't have to feel everything. So if you do allow the compassion to come in and you really feel what you're seeing, it's very, very, very difficult. And it's important also not to let your emotions then take over everything and eclipse the person's story that you're trying to tell and what the overall situation is. And that's why I think truth and compassion together is the key, because you need to get that story across the truth, and you need to do it compassionately. But if your emotion takes over, then A, you can't do your job, and B, it's, I mean, just from a practical perspective, it's actually quite uncomfortable for the people you're talking to, because in the end, it's their story and their grief. And it can be difficult because it can cloud your judgment. You can get very, very angry. And as a conflict reporter, I very often have to, I really believe in therapy. And, we did a sort of essentially a somatic experiencing breathing exercise. I really believe in that. I think you have to be able to decide to take out yourself from it whilst keeping yourself in it. So it's like a dance that you do all the time. But I see my role as essentially, if I can, reaching through that screen or through those words to the people sitting in, at home in their living room or kitchen table, wherever it is, and try and connect them to what's happening here. Because I think the history of journalism, foreign correspondence, has been very much like, this is a strange planet that's happening behind me. And what I want, and we have shared human experiences, even if you would never know what it's like to be a civilian in Gaza, everyone's lost someone. And I think it's really important to be able to make those connections so that we continue to humanize everyone in all of these environments, because I see the role of a conflict journalist is essentially working to end conflict journalism. I would like to see a world with no wars. So I feel like my job is to try and tell almost a cautionary tale through giving platforms to people that I meet, to somehow work towards a day where my job doesn't exist anymore.
Right.
And maybe I can go and start a cat cafe or something. But that is a long-winded answer to your question.
No, it's an extraordinary answer to the question, which is why you're such an extraordinary journalist, because I think that piece of not letting your own emotion and this is why, again, the inner work becomes so important, right? That I can handle suffering, that I can handle what does it mean to be in a compassionate response where I'm not oozing out all my own trauma and stuff on someone else. I think it's so critical to this. And it makes me think about medicine, right? We've had the same conversation with doctors to ensure that they are compassionate to the people that they are giving care to, or to educators, that they are having compassion, and school administrators and superintendents, that they are compassionate with the students that they work with. And then we're hopefully this is rolling into our offices, that we start to think about the fact that when we talk about AI transition, when we talk about jobs, and we talk about the economy, these are not just statistics, and these are not just numbers, and these are not just spreadsheet items. These are actually really human lives that are being impacted by this, and the decisions that we make have such extraordinary impact. And so I think that your conversation has this universal application around all of that. And I appreciate the answer that you gave me so I can be a better steward of this conversation. So thanks, babe.
If I can add in there just to say, I mean, the subject of that talk, if you didn't mind, sorry, was the collapse of discourse, because I mean, obviously reporting on conflicts is a very specific thing and it doesn't necessarily resonate with everyone, but what does resonate with everyone is our inability to talk to each other, which is happening right now. I mean, I think everyone feels that. And I think right now, especially when you have a war, like the situation that's happening in Gaza, I mean, it's like experiencing totally different alternate realities, when you look at social media. And so I think the reason I'm bringing that up is just that there's got to be ways that we all, whether you're a conflict journalist or whatever role that you're in, whatever job it in, and as human beings and citizens of a collective planet, is to work towards trying to ensure that we can still talk to each other, because it's the most dangerous thing when the other side is otherized or dehumanized, when it seems impossible to reach across the divide. Conflict journalism is one thing I think that can contribute in a negative way, but there's obviously other industries. And that's why I think we need to have essentially in every form of job emphasis on ensuring that we do, I don't know how, this is sounding very naive, but have best practices of being able to keep discourse open. And I was just thinking about one of the, as you were talking also, it's why I really believe in trauma-informed practices across the board, whatever your job is. Obviously with conflict journalism, we have a lot of work to do there, both in terms of trauma-informed journalism for themselves and also for the work they do, and also how they conduct their work. I mean, I've watched with horror some quite disturbing interviews that journalists have practiced with people who are survivors. But I think that if we can have a kind of trauma-informed world that focuses on discourse, not otherizing other people, that has truth and compassion together as the sort of building bricks, then I think we might go some way to building a better planet.
Amen, sister. You know, in schools, we see in the US, there's this rise of social emotional learning, which is a small step in that. And right, you teach compassion and teach empathy and teach regulation and teach some of those things. And I think that they're barely rolling into, which again, why I thought Tony Hsieh's work in Zappos was so groundbreaking at the time. He was somebody who was really trying to bring some of that to the work that each of us do. I could go on and on about the places where that is so necessary. But I am grateful for your work. I am grateful for you. If you guys have any questions or anything you want to say to Bel before we transition to a piece of music that lets us all just sort of like sit with that for a moment. But I think we can all just give you like at least a silent, you know, like gratitude for
Thank you.
who and what you are. Anybody want to jump in? And I'm sorry, I think somebody had their hand up before and I missed it. So I'm really not great at moderating this portion of Zoom. Leora?
I just want to thank you so much, Bel, for being a demonstration of what's possible. It's so rare that we see that in that field, at least in my experience. And yet I'm very clear that what's necessary for, you know, peace on earth is more of Bel Trews, more Bel Trews. Thank you.
Thank you. That means a lot to me. I mean, I think I actually said in my talk that I'm sounding like I'm the Mother Teresa of journalism, but in actual fact, I mess up as well. And, you know, I do. And you know, regret lives in my head rent free. But, you know, I also just wanted to, first of all, thank you so much for super kind words. I also just want to say there's some amazing people right now who, if anyone's interested in the specific situation that's happening in Gaza, who are really bridging that divide. So there's an incredible man called Moaz Inan and his brother Magit, whose parents were both killed on the 7th of October. They're Israeli, and they've teamed up with a Palestinian activist who's called Aziz Abu Zahra, who actually spoke in the House of Beautiful Business. And together, if you want to follow their work, they are like the living, breathing truth and compassion, dialogue, discourse people who, when you hear them speak, they go through hell every day with criticism, but they do an amazing work. And it's just, yeah. If anyone's
Is there a way
interested.
to just put that in the name? Because
Yes.
that's very fast.
Yeah. Sorry, I do speak fast. I'll do that right now. But they had a TED discussion about this. So I'll put that. I'll find the link and I'll send that in the chat.
Cool. And if you don't find it at this moment, you can send it to us and we'll send it with a recap as well, Bel. But I think that is again, another really amazing demonstration. I mean, powerful demonstration around how we reach across. Right. Any other comments? Everybody jump in? Yep. Hey. Oh, Meta. Sorry. Jump in.
Sorry. Yeah. I'm sorry.
You're just so polite. I'm just like, jump in, man.
Yeah, it says Medav's iPad, but it's Richard Boyd. So
that's what I thought. Richard, hi.
Yeah,
It's
thank
good
you
to
for
see you.
this event. This is really amazing, and I have lots of thoughts. I posted my thought in there in chat about opposite of imposter syndrome. I'll let that sit for a minute. But with Bel, what I'm thinking about is for the last 12 years, I've done these talks for the State Department called the Simulation Century. And the idea there is that the last century was about the moving image. It was the first time when humanity could reflect upon a big event like Vietnam War, fall of the Berlin Wall, or what's happening in Gaza by looking at video footage of it and reflecting upon it, usually mediated by journalism, but of course now not mediated by journalists in all cases. So I'm really interested now, though, in the idea of how do we, all this new technology, not new, but the latest rage of technology around AI and simulation, how do we put that in the service of the good, benevolent outcomes we're trying to seek? Like, how do we take it and not just predict the future, but design the future that we want? What kind of society do we want? What kind of state, what kind of city, what kind of country or planet? And then solve backwards from that. And obviously the decline of the fourth estate is problematic, but how do we bring all this technology we've been creating to the service of good? That's my thought.
A very profound thought, especially coming from you. So guys, if you follow Richard Boyd's work, he is at the forefront of the AI simulation and avatars, and being able to take this and actually be able to construct, again, personas or however you want to describe it, Richard, but you've been so deep into that work and have really been laying a lot of the groundwork for it. So I appreciate that you were coming at it from that place of understanding and compassion and humanity, right? And because when people ask me about things, I actually got a request the other day. I don't think Robbie's on the call, but someone who I am friends with, mostly through LinkedIn and some other work we've done. His wife had died tragically in a car accident 3 months ago, and he asked how he could create her into a digital avatar, and did I know any resources for him? And I pointed him to your work. Which gonna make me cry again. Like I'm in like this very weepy mood today. Not because I thought that you could necessarily solve it for him, but he was looking for some place where he could find a place, you know, that he could trust, that could help him tell the story and live with it differently moving forward. So these are the interesting questions that we're going to get as we move forward, right? And ways in which we bring our humanity to it.
Yeah, absolutely. For those of you who don't know, my father died in 2017, so I used machine learning way back then to make a model of him I could interact with. And it was very comforting for me. And I wasn't necessarily recommending it for everybody, but it got picked up by some journalists. And I ended up doing a speaking tour of South America about it. People were urging me to go into business doing it, but I couldn't think of a business model that didn't make me not feel awesome. So I decided, I'm sure other people will do that. But I think now we've got the tools where individually, any of us who want to do that, there are practical methods by which you can make a model of a loved one and have them sort of around you, or that at least that shadow version of them with you afterwards, to the extent it makes sense for you, but not.
Right. Well, and hope we use it in healthy ways and not unhealthy ways, right? There's a whole nother conversation around all that, which is like actually Bel and Richard, if you guys ever wanted to connect with each other, I'd be happy to connect you too, because I think that there's so much interesting work you could do together in some of this. How do you bring people closer to a story or closer to a point of view?
I would like to talk to you about that. We're making a course for high school students, working with Jim O'Shea, who was the managing editor of the Chicago Tribune, around how do you have, like, if there's a major event, how could you go into a virtual world and talk to AI avatars and actually interview them and learn the skills of journalism, and how to use your skills to actually write that story. That's just put a pin in that. And if you want to talk, I'd love to talk further with anyone who wants to think about that issue.
Good. Bel, you in?
Yes, 100% in. Because actually, I'd probably ask the question you asked me back to you, because I don't know the answer to that. But I think it's very important, just very, very quickly, and then we'll move on. Instead of, I think there's a lot of conversations about how AI is going to get in the way of journalism or be very destructive. And there's many ways it can be and is already in terms of deep fakes and stuff like that. But I think we should turn the conversation around and see how we can use it for good. And that I'd love to know. I'd love to join the course.
All right. So again, the future gets brighter. Okay. So as a moment of exhale, we did not find live musicians for this event because we felt like it's always a little trickier to do that, in all honesty, but we wanted to have live people. And so we found a piece of music that just gives us a moment to take a breath and sort of like let some of this conversation settle. But we do also have another really beautiful piece that Alexis is going to take us through afterwards around the contrast between the heroine's journey and the hero's journey, some of which I think we've already picked up a bit of today, but I think that we will go deeper into it. So hopefully you guys can stick around. We may go 5 or so minutes over, and certainly can have as much conversation afterwards. But I would like to introduce you to this piece of music. It's a piece of animation. Eric Whitaker has done these virtual choirs, as was first introduced to me at TED years ago. But here's one of his more recent works. Emma, you can put it in the chat, like the year or some of the titles and stuff. I just have experienced it. I don't know the story of it. So we'll take us on a few minute journey. I love watching you dance to it, Emma. You're like the best face ever. As we listen to this, it's funny, we put all these things in a spreadsheet and we put all the pieces together, but it's not until we actually get to run it with you all that I get to feel the power of it. And I think that piece is just extraordinary. So, Zamita, I think you're the one who found that, but thank you. It's just, it's breathtaking to watch. And so for me, it's about the power of all the voices that give that person courage to go fly, right? This is not, again, a solo journey. This is about the collective giving us the awareness of our own wings and the wind beneath to fly with them. So with that, I don't know if anyone wants to jump in and say anything. If you do, raise your hand. If not, I will transition this to Lex, who's going to close us out with this other journey. I'm going to show another video that is a historic view of this conversation of the contrast between the heroine's journey and the hero's journey. So Joseph Campbell, we're all, familiar with, or many of us are familiar with this conversation about how the brave person goes and solo, makes it through the divide and conquers and comes out the other side, the big winner. Often the women are the really bad guys to try to get in his way. And there's a woman, Maureen Murdoch, who challenged that. She was a student of his, a Jungian psychologist who challenged that. She wrote a book in 1990 around it. And so there's a little video excerpt we have about her work if you guys are interested. But I think that Lex can take us through some of that and to where we are now in 2024, leading into the future that we want. So Lex, take it away.
I just want to say how powerful it is to be collectively here and to have these sparks of conversation and to see how it all weaves together, right? It's what I love in these invitations that you all are doing. It's like, what's the old story and what's the new story? And when we started talking about this, and Nancy and I started talking about shadow work and some of the work that I'm really doing and where I'm just most lit up, it's around this idea of how do we come to collective, a new kind of power from a place of like connectedness. And I think it requires going sort of down and in a circle. We talked about the shape and not about that sort of hero's piece. So the theory of the heroine's journey versus the hero's journey has really lit me up and has me thinking about how do you take the theory and how do you apply it to, what is needed now, and the work that Bel's doing, the work that people are doing. Like, we're getting some frameworks to be able to access this. And one of the things I also love, if the news story, and I call it the really kind of the evolution of that 1990 heroine's journey has been to eco heroine's journey and sort of that connectedness to Earth as well. And when we were talking about if the news story is the eco heroine's journey, it's actually an old story. I mean, it's a returning story. It's something we've known for a long time. And one of the times I was first introduced to it was through the myth of Inanna. And some of you may know the original Sumerian myth, which was actually the kind of one of the earliest known narratives in all of human history. And Inanna, it's from the ancient Mesopotamia. And this, if you know it, I'll just briefly tell you, Inanna is the ruler of heaven and earth, and she is, great and sparkly, and she is doing her badass self, ruling heaven and earth. And she has a deep longing to go into the underworld. And the call is from her sister, Erishkigal. And she gets ready for this journey by putting all of the things on that make her who she is, because she's the ruler and she has a staff and she's got all the glitz and glam. And she starts. And as she goes, in this story, she has to pass 7 gates. And at each gate, she is required to be stripped. And this is kind of who goes there. And I am Inanna. And she has to strip herself of a key way she knows herself. So there's this series of surrenders in terms of what is known as she goes down, and she ends up ultimately kind of dying down there. It's like all of those myths, right? She gets put on this meat hook, and she ends up being sort of saved by her sister and coming into this, it's a rebirth story, and she goes back out into the world. So it's one of the things when I think about the myth of Inanna and I compare it. So what are those key differences from the eco heroine and the heroine? So it's the hero's journey is up and out, and it's individual. The eco heroine tends to be collective. It's with others. It's together. I saw that earlier on the chat. It's not a by yourself. In fact, the surrendering of ego to eco is we are all already part of it. It's a lot about not just overcoming conflict, but aligning in harmony. It's not a linear journey. It's a circular journey. It's down and in. I think the shape is the labyrinth, because it's sort of, you go in and you need to go in, but you can't stay in. You have to come back out together. And it's less about this external conquering and more about sort of the internal. So what I've been curious about, and I don't need to tell you guys about what I'm doing, but what I'm curious about is all of our journeys in this way. And if we think about what's our down and in journey, what happens and what kind of power do we have access to? A lot of you all who know me here, I've been using the phrase full witch. My journey has been to full witch. And when I say that, I mean like no more pretending, and to that sort of powerful, dangerous that, witches have been burned for a long time for kind of saying what's true and coming into a different kind of intelligence that's not just in your brain, but it's a connected consciousness, an intelligence of the earth. It's an intelligence of a lot of things. So I will leave you all with my quote that really, it's by Annie Dillard. And it's this whole idea that in the eco-heroine's journey, we don't slay the dragon, we ride the dragon. We ride the dragon down. And when we get there, we give up something to get something more. But it's kind of terrifying. Mary Scott is on this call. She is a death doula. You know, it's faced with grief. We have to face grief in part of this. So I'll leave you with the quote, and then we'll just say one quick thing. I'll ask you a question. In the depths, in the deeps are the violence and terror of which psychology has warned us. But if you ride these monsters deeper down, if you drop with them over the world's rim, you find what our sciences cannot locate or name, the substrate, the ocean or matrix or ether, which buoys the rest, which gives goodness its power for good and evil its power for evil. The unified field, our complex and inexplicable caring for each other and for our life together here. This is given, it is not learned. So I'll turn it back to you, Nancy, because I know we don't have a lot of time, but just the invitation is to think about what happens when we tell a new story, and a new story about power, and a power that is based on surrender and grief and joy. And what if we operated from that place of surrendered power? What might we do?
Thank you so much. Like, I know you didn't have quite as much time, but I think you did an extraordinary job of in that invitation. And it's been interesting because as I've been traveling through Costa Rica, I've been listening to books on tape, or I've been reading things more than I have had time to. And what I think is fascinating is that this conversation can sometimes be caught as feminine, right? But we're seeing it now in so much of the other work. I finished a book on the Agora by Byron Reese, and at the end it was all this, a call, like compelling desire that if we think of ourselves as a superorganism, we lead with compassion and empathy and kindness was his word. And then I listened to David Brooks talk about a book about how to relate with one another better. And he's just sort of defining this, like he's kind of rounded the corner and realized, oh my gosh, it really is about this like deep connecting with one another. That I think that as certainly as women and people who are more connected to the feminine in them are finding that to be a very natural path, right? And I think that for me, even coming here, it was about trying to get to honoring of that and the embracing of that. And so thank you for helping reinforce all of that for all of us. And thanks for just being on the planet and doing the work that you do with such care and such love. Lex, you hold really complex conversations for people, and you do it in a space that makes them feel very capable of being able to go down. And Mary Scott, I can't even imagine what your work is like, but thank you for the work that you do as lovingly and kindly as you must do it. So for all of you who are doing this work and coming in and spending an hour and a half with us, on a Saturday, like this is a real commitment. I always sign up for things and don't sign up. So I really, really appreciate that you all are here. This is how the world shifts and changes. I also appreciate that we have a bunch of people that we haven't seen on these calls before. So the word must be spreading, but do encourage other people to join, share the recording when we send it out. Unfortunately, some of the things that we take from YouTube when we edit, we can't then put them on YouTube because YouTube blocks them for copyright reasons. So if you need any of those videos that we've edited, let us know. We can send them black market underground individually to you all. Bootlegged, I should say, not black market. But I'm grateful for each and every one of you. John Trube, I'm excited you're here. Matthew, I love the work that you do. Again, I'm just, I'm very, very weepy, and I am very, very grateful. We're going to end with a song, but also Mike Parker, who has joined us on New Year's Day. He's joined us again today from London. Hey, Mike. Leads a consulting practice that is all about the liminal. And liminal, not just meaning like between this side of business and that side of business, but really into the space of ourselves and what we know and what we don't know. And he graciously has gifted us a meditation, a relaxation meditation that he uses as part of his work that is partly hypnotic and partly just a wonderful dive in. And so in the chat, we'll keep the link there. So you guys have a little gift, so grab that before we sign off. Any other words you guys want to say before we give you a closing piece of music to take out? Any thoughts? While you gather those, I would say Leora and I are going to co-host July. So we're going to be halfway through the year when we hit the the airwaves again on July 1st, and Leora and Emma and Zamita and I are putting together what we think is another really profound program. It's going to go actually really much more, it's going to go out there. It's going to really take us into a much deeper, not even deeper, more expansive. I wouldn't say deeper, a more expansive conversation around what it's, in this magical world that we can see and unsee, and how we're finding some of the portals and our ways into that, and what does it mean to be in this moment in time. So I really encourage you all to make space for us. Again, we'll do that again in the evening. So that will be a challenge for our friends in Europe. Mike, if you get, or Christine, or if you guys can help us figure out how do we fix that problem, whether we do it twice or whether we do it some other time, let me know. This is the one constriction that we have not been able to navigate quite well, the constraint. But we're still continuing to work on it. So with that, I just say big hugs and lots and lots and lots of love. Thank you, Kelly, for your support. Emma, thank you for being the best collaborator ever. Zamita, thank you for all the work that you've done with us for the last couple of years. This is your last official event with us. I'm going to get all weepy. But because you are, taking such good care of and love my son so much, will get to be in my life forever. So this is not goodbye. It's just a transition, which is what all of these conversations are about. It is about transition to the next. So thank you all. And thank you, Lisa. And big hugs and big heart. And in this final song, again, we're always trying to figure out what the right music is. I keep sending things to the team and to tell us if I've gone too far or not. This is just a piece of music that I happened to bump into because he just did a collaboration with Dolly Parton. So anything that Dolly does, I find. This is not that song, but as I dug in more into his work, I'm finding that actually I find Christian gospel music to be a place of tremendous comfort for me right now. I'm a very secular spiritual person, but for some reason that portal of music just always makes me feel really, really great. And so this is a piece by a man named Blessing Offering.